At my husband's funeral, I sat alone. My children laughed at a beach party while I buried their father. The chapel was cold that morning. I remember noticing that first, how the air conditioning was turned up too high, making the flower arrangements shiver slightly in the artificial breeze. Or maybe I was the one shivering. It's hard to say now. I sat in the front pew, my hands folded in my lap, staring at the casket that held Robert. 42 years of marriage, and it had come down to this. Me, alone, in a room that should have been filled with our family. The funeral director had asked me 3 times if I wanted to wait a bit longer before starting the service. "Sometimes families run late, Mrs. Patterson," he'd said gently, his eyes full of practiced sympathy. But I knew they weren't running late. They simply weren't coming. I'd chosen Robert's favorite suit, the navy one he wore to our daughter Jennifer's wedding. His reading glasses were tucked in the breast pocket, even though he wouldn't need them anymore. I'd done everything myself. Picked out the casket, selected the flowers, wrote the obituary. For 2 years, while Robert battled lung cancer, I'd done everything. Fed him, bathed him, changed his sheets at 3 in the morning when the night sweats came, held his hand through chemotherapy sessions that left him so weak he couldn't lift his head. And through it all, I'd made excuses for our children. "Mom, I can't come this weekend. Work is crazy right now." That was Daniel, our oldest. Always work. Always a project deadline. A meeting he couldn't miss. A crisis only he could solve. I wish I could help, but the kids have soccer and dance, and I just can't manage the drive right now. That was Jennifer. 3 hours. The drive was 3 hours. She'd driven 6 hours to go to a spa weekend with her friends just last month. I'd seen the photos on Facebook. Dad understands, right? He knows I'm thinking of him. That was Michael, our youngest. Thinking of him. As if thoughts could sit beside a dying man's bed. As if thoughts could hold a basin when he was too sick to make it to the bathroom. The service started at 10. By 9:45, I knew. I knew they weren't coming, but some stupid, hopeful part of me kept turning around, watching the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for my children to walk through and prove me wrong. Pastor Williams spoke about Robert's dedication to his family, about what a loving father he'd been, about how proud he was of his 3 children. I sat there, nodding at the appropriate times, my throat tight with something that felt like glass. Robert had been a good father. He'd coached Daniel's Little League team for 7 years. He'd walked Jennifer down the aisle, tears streaming down his face. He'd helped Michael move into 5 different apartments during his finding himself phase. He'd been there for every graduation, every birthday, every milestone. And where were they now? Margaret Henderson, our neighbor for 20 years, sat behind me. I could feel her confusion. After the service, she touched my shoulder softly. "Linda, where are the kids? Are they coming to the cemetery?" I'd prepared for this question. I'd practiced the lie in the mirror that morning while putting on my black dress. "They're devastated," I said, my voice steady. "This has been so hard on them. They said their goodbyes privately." Margaret nodded, but her eyes told me she didn't quite believe it. How could she? What children don't come to their own father's funeral? At the cemetery, there were maybe 15 people. Robert's old colleague from the accounting firm, a few neighbors, his poker buddies from Tuesday nights. The sun was bright, inappropriately cheerful. I stood at the edge of the grave, clutching the single rose the funeral director had handed me, and I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The tears felt stuck somewhere deep inside, trapped behind a wall of shock and disbelief. When I got home, the house was exactly as I'd left it. Empty, quiet. Robert's hospital bed was still set up in the living room, where we'd spent his final months so he could look out at the garden he loved. I'd need to call someone to pick it up, I thought distantly. Add it to the list of things I had to do alone. I made myself a cup of tea. Not because I wanted it, but because it was something to do. My hand shook as I poured the hot water. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals as a family, and I pulled out my phone. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't have looked. But I couldn't help myself. I opened Instagram first, Jennifer's account. The most recent post was from 2 hours ago. A photo of her and David, her husband, on a beach somewhere. She was wearing a bright yellow bikini, holding a cocktail with a little umbrella in it. Her caption read, "Sometimes you just need to disconnect and recharge. Life is too short not to celebrate it. Beach therapy with my love. Life is too short." She'd posted that while I was lowering her father into the ground. I scrolled down. Another photo, this one from yesterday. All three of them together. Daniel, Jennifer, and Michael, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. They were standing on a dock, sunset behind them, looking tanned and relaxed. Daniel had commented, "Sibling weekend? Much needed after a rough few months." A rough few months. That's what they were calling it. Their father's death was a rough few months that required a beach vacation. Michael's stories showed more. Videos of them at a beachfront restaurant, laughing over plates of seafood. A clip of Jennifer dancing to loud music at what looked like a tiki bar. Daniel doing a cannonball into a pool. They hadn't just skipped the funeral. They'd planned a trip. Together. All three of them had coordinated schedules, booked flights, rented a beach house. They'd made the conscious decision that their father's funeral was less important than frozen drinks and Instagram photos. I set the phone down carefully on the table, worried that if I held it any longer, I might throw it across the room. The house was too quiet. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a lawnmower from someone's yard. Normal sounds. The world was just continuing like nothing had happened. I walked to Robert's study, a room I'd barely entered in the past 2 years. It had been his space, and even during his illness I'd respected that. His desk was neat, organized in that methodical way he'd always kept things. Bills in one stack, personal correspondence in another, his reading materials in a third. There was a framed photo on his desk, the 5 of us at the Grand Canyon, maybe 15 years ago. The kids were still teenagers, still looked at us like we mattered. Jennifer was leaning against Robert. Daniel had his arm around my shoulder. Michael was making a silly face at the camera. We looked happy. We looked like a family. When did that change? I sat in Robert's leather chair, the one that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and that's when I saw it. A manila envelope propped against his desk lamp. My name was written on it in his handwriting, slightly shaky from the medication but still unmistakably his. Linda, it said. Nothing else. Just my name. I picked it up, my heart suddenly pounding. It was sealed. I turned it over in my hands, noticing it was thick, weighted with something more than just a letter. I thought about Robert in his final weeks, when he could barely stay awake for more than an hour at a time. Thought about how he'd sometimes ask me to leave the room, said he needed to rest. Had he been writing this then? Planning something I didn't know about? My hands trembled as I started to open it, then stopped. The funeral had been too much. This day had been too much. Whatever was in this envelope, whatever Robert had wanted to tell me, I wasn't ready. Not yet. I placed it back on the desk, exactly where I'd found it, but as I stood to leave the study, I heard my phone buzz in the kitchen. Multiple buzzes, one after another, messages coming in. I walked back and picked it up. Daniel, hey Mom, when you get a chance, can you send me the info for Dad's life insurance policy? Need to get that process started. Jennifer, Mom, we should probably talk about the house soon. I know you're emotional right now, but waiting too long just makes things harder. Call me when you're up for it. Michael. Did Dad have any stocks or bonds? Trying to get a sense of the estate. Let me know. I read each message twice, then 3 times. They still hadn't mentioned the funeral, hadn't asked how it went, hadn't apologized for not being there. They'd gone straight to the money. I looked back toward Robert's study, toward that envelope sitting on his desk. Maybe I was ready after all. I didn't open the envelope that night. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in Robert's chair until the room grew dark, holding my phone and reading those messages over and over again. By morning, there were more. Daniel had sent 3 follow-up texts asking about bank account information. Jennifer had forwarded me a Zillow estimate for the house with a note. Just FYI, the market is really good right now. Michael had texted a screenshot of some financial planning website with tips for managing sudden inheritance. None of them had called. None of them had asked how I was doing. None of them had mentioned their father at all, except as a source of money they were now entitled to. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sunrise through the window. Robert used to sit in this exact spot every morning reading the newspaper. I'd always teased him about being old-fashioned, but he'd insisted there was something about holding actual paper that made the news feel more real. Everything felt too real now. I thought about calling them, confronting them, demanding to know how they could have done this. But what would I say? What words could possibly express the betrayal I felt? Instead, I found myself remembering, going back through the past few years, looking for the moment when everything changed, when my children stopped being the people I thought they were. It wasn't sudden. That's what made it so much worse. It was gradual, like watching a photograph fade in sunlight. So slow you don't notice until one day you realize the image is barely there anymore. I remembered Daniel's wedding 6 years ago. Robert had insisted on paying for half, even though Daniel made good money at his tech company. "It's tradition," Robert had said. "The bride's family shouldn't bear all the cost." We'd written a check for $23,000. Daniel had thanked us, but there was something perfunctory about it, like we'd simply done what was expected. At the reception, he'd spent more time with his new in-laws than with us. His toast had mentioned his mother-in-law 3 times. He'd mentioned me once in passing. "My parents taught me the value of hard work," he'd said, raising his glass in our general direction before turning back to his wife's family. That should have been my first clue. Then there was Jennifer's crisis 3 years ago. Her husband David had lost his job, and they were struggling with the mortgage on that too-big house they'd insisted on buying. She'd called me crying, saying they might lose everything. Robert had been hesitant. "She needs to learn that choices have consequences," he'd said, but I couldn't stand hearing my daughter cry. I'd convinced him to lend them $15,000 to get them through the rough patch. "Lend," I'd said. "They'll pay us back." They never did. And 6 months later, when David got a new job making even more than before, Jennifer posted photos of their vacation to Hawaii. 5-star resort, sunset dinner cruises, spa treatments. When I'd gently mentioned the loan, she'd gotten defensive. "Mom, we needed that trip. The stress of David being unemployed almost destroyed our marriage. You wouldn't understand. I'd let it go. I always let it go. And Michael, sweet Michael, our baby, he'd lived with us until he was 28, just until I figure things out," he'd said. Figuring things out apparently required our financial support for his various business ideas. The food truck that never got off the ground, the app he was developing that never launched, the online store that folded after 3 months. We'd funded all of it. 20,000 here, 15,000 there. Investments in our son's future, Robert had called it, though his tone had grown increasingly bitter with each failed venture. When Michael finally moved out, it was because he'd met a woman with her own apartment. He'd taken half our furniture without asking, said he needed it to get started. I'd come home one day to find our guest bedroom stripped bare. But the real shift happened 2 years ago, when Robert got his diagnosis. I remember the day we told them. We'd called a family meeting, asked them all to come to the house on a Sunday afternoon. It was the last time all 3 of them were here together. Robert had been direct, the way he always was with serious matters. "I have stage 3 lung cancer. Treatment starts next week. The prognosis isn't great, but we're going to fight this." There'd been shock, of course. Jennifer had cried. Daniel had gotten quiet. Michael had paced the room, running his hands through his hair. But then, after the initial reaction, came the distance. "I'll try to visit when I can," Daniel had said, "but work is really demanding right now. We just landed a huge account, and I'm the lead on the project." "Mom, you'll keep us updated, right?" Jennifer had asked. "I want to be here, but with the kids' schedules and everything, it's so hard to get away." Michael had hugged me on his way out. "Dad's tough. He'll beat this." Then he'd left, and I wouldn't see him again for 6 weeks. The treatment was brutal. Robert had always been a big man, solid, strong. Watching the cancer and the chemotherapy eat away at him was like watching a building being demolished in slow motion. He lost 60 pounds. His hair fell out. His skin took on a grayish tint that scared me every time I looked at him. I took him to every appointment, every treatment session. I sat in those plastic chairs in the oncology ward, holding his hand while poison dripped into his veins, supposedly killing the cancer, but killing so much else in the process. I'd text the kids updates. Dad had a rough session today. Might be nice if you could call him. Sometimes they would. Brief calls, awkward conversations where they'd talk about their own lives while Robert listened quietly. More often, they wouldn't. Daniel came to visit exactly 3 times in those 2 years. Each visit lasted less than 2 hours. He'd sit in the living room, checking his phone constantly, making comments about how much medical care had improved, how the survival rates were better than ever, empty optimism that did nothing but make Robert feel worse. Jennifer came more often, maybe once every 2 months, but her visits were performative. She'd take photos of herself with Robert, post them on social media with captions like, "Cherishing time with Dad, stay strong." Then she'd leave after an hour, saying the kids needed her at home. Michael came the least. He'd moved to the coast for his girlfriend's job, he'd said. "It's really far, Mom. But I'm thinking of Dad all the time. Thinking of him. Always thinking of him. Never actually being here." The worst part was watching Robert notice, watching him realize, slowly, that the children he'd devoted his life to couldn't be bothered to show up when he needed them most. "Linda," he'd said one night, about 6 months before he died. It was late, around 2 in the morning. I'd been dozing in the chair next to his hospital bed when I heard him say my name. "I'm here," I'd said, immediately alert. "Do you need something? Are you in pain? I need you to listen to me," he'd said. His voice was weak, but there was an urgency to it. "The kids, you need to stop making excuses for them. Robert, they're just busy. They have their own lives now. They have time for everything except us," he'd said. "Daniel took a week off last month for a golf trip. I saw the photos. Jennifer just redecorated her entire house. Must have had time for that. And Michael posts videos of himself at bars and restaurants almost every weekend." I'd wanted to argue, to defend them, but I couldn't. Because he was right. "You've always protected them," Robert had continued. "Even when they were kids, even when they did something wrong, you'd find a way to explain it, to excuse it. But Linda, they're not kids anymore. They're adults who are choosing not to be here. And you need to see that." "They love us," I'd whispered. "They're just not good at showing it." Robert had reached for my hand, his grip weak but determined. "Love isn't something you feel. It's something you do. And they're not doing it." I'd cried then, silently, not wanting him to see how much his words hurt because they were true. "I'm handling it," he'd said after a moment. "I'm making sure you're protected." "Protected from what?" "From being alone and broke after I'm gone," he'd said bluntly. "They're going to come around asking for things, Linda. They're going to expect their inheritance. And I'm making sure that doesn't happen the way they think it will." "What do you mean?" But he'd closed his eyes, exhausted from the conversation. "There's a letter. In my desk. When I'm gone, when you're ready to see the truth, read it." That was 4 months ago. We'd never spoken about it again. And now here I was, that letter sitting unopened in his study, while our children texted me about life insurance policies and real estate estimates. I picked up my phone and scrolled back through my messages with them. Months and months of one-sided conversations. Me asking how they were doing, telling them about their father's condition, sending photos of small victories, a day with no vomiting, a short walk outside, a smile. Their responses were sporadic. "That's great, Mom. Glad he's hanging in there. Keep us posted." Never. "How are you holding up?" Never. "Do you need anything?" Never. "We're coming to visit." I found the last text exchange with Daniel from 2 weeks before Robert died. Me. "Dad had a really bad night. The pain is getting worse. The hospice nurse says it might not be much longer." Daniel. "Sorry to hear that. Rough situation." That was it. Rough situation. Like we were talking about a traffic jam or a disappointing restaurant meal. I kept scrolling, finding similar exchanges with Jennifer and Michael. Dozens of them. All the same pattern. Me reaching out, them responding with the bare minimum. And yet I'd kept trying, kept hoping. kept believing that they cared even when everything they did proved otherwise. My phone buzzed again. Jennifer. Mom, I know this is hard, but we really need to start making decisions. The house alone is worth at least $650,000. We need to discuss how to handle this efficiently. Can you call me today? Efficiently. She wanted to handle her father's death efficiently. I stood up, walked to Robert's study, and picked up the envelope. My hands were steadier now. The shock had worn off, replaced by something else, something colder. I opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten on Robert's personalized stationery. But there was also something else. A key, small, brass, with a number stamped on it. The kind of key you get for a safe deposit box. I unfolded the letter. Robert's handwriting was shaky but legible. My dearest Linda, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And if our children didn't come to say goodbye, then you know everything I was trying to tell you is true. I've loved you for 42 years. You've been my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. And I've watched you give everything to our children, including pieces of yourself, without ever asking for anything in return. I've also watched them take and take and take, never once appreciating what they had, never once recognizing the extraordinary woman who sacrificed for them again and again. I tried to raise them differently. I tried to teach them responsibility, gratitude, respect. But somewhere along the way, they learned that Mom would always fix things. Mom would always provide. Mom would always make excuses for them. And they learned to depend on that instead of becoming people who could depend on themselves. So I've made some changes, Linda. Changes I couldn't discuss with you because I knew you'd try to talk me out of them. Because even now, even after everything, you'd want to protect them from the consequences of their own choices. This key opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank, Box 247. Inside, you'll find documents. Read them carefully. They explain everything. I've protected you, Linda. I've made sure that for once in your life, you'll be taken care of before everyone else. I've made sure that our children will learn what it means to face reality without you there to cushion the fall. This isn't revenge. This is love. Love for you. The woman who deserves so much better than what they've given you. Trust me one last time. Forever yours, Robert. I read the letter 3 times. Then I looked at the key in my hand, small and innocent, holding answers I wasn't sure I wanted. My phone buzzed again. Michael this time. Hey, Mom. Quick question. Did Dad have any retirement accounts we should know about? Just trying to get a full picture. I looked at the phone, then at the letter, then at the key. Robert had tried to tell me. For months he'd tried to make me see what our children had become, and I'd refused to listen because accepting it meant accepting that I'd somehow failed as a mother. But sitting there in his study, reading his final words, I realized something. I hadn't failed. They had. They'd failed to become decent human beings despite having every advantage, every opportunity, every ounce of love and support 2 parents could give. And Robert had known. He'd seen it clearly when I'd been too close, too invested, too hopeful to accept the truth. I picked up my purse and grabbed my car keys. First National Bank opened at 9. It was 8:30 now. I had 30 minutes to find out exactly what my husband had been protecting me from. The bank was nearly empty when I arrived. A Monday morning, most people already at work. The fluorescent lights were too bright, making everything feel stark and exposed. I approached the reception desk, clutching the key so tightly it left an imprint on my palm. I need to access a safe deposit box, I said to the young woman behind the counter. Box 247, she smiled professionally. Of course. I'll need to see some identification and verify the box registration. I handed her my driver's license, my hands surprisingly steady now. She typed something into her computer, then frowned slightly. Mrs. Patterson, it looks like this box was registered in your name 6 months ago. Were you aware of that? 6 months ago. That was right after Robert's doctor had told us the cancer had spread to his lymph nodes. When we'd known, really known, that he wasn't going to beat this. Yes, I lied. I just haven't had a chance to access it until now. She nodded and led me to a small private room in the back of the bank. The walls were plain beige, containing only a table and 2 chairs. She used her master key along with mine to retrieve the box, then left me alone with it. The metal box was heavier than I'd expected. I sat down and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside were folders, several of them, each labeled in Robert's precise handwriting. I pulled them out one by one and spread them across the table. The first folder was labeled Estate Planning, Updated. I opened it with trembling fingers. The first document was Robert's will. I'd thought I knew what was in it. We'd done our estate planning together years ago, splitting everything equally among the 3 children, with me having full access to everything while I was alive. Standard, sensible, fair. But this wasn't that will. This was dated 4 months ago, notarized and witnessed by people I didn't recognize. I began to read. Robert had restructured everything. The house was now solely in my name, with a provision that it could not be sold or transferred for at least 5 years without my explicit written consent, countersigned by an attorney not related to our children. If I died within those 5 years, it would be sold, and the proceeds donated to the cancer research center where Robert had been treated. Our joint savings accounts had been separated. Everything was now in my name alone. His pension survivor benefits were mine, with no option for the children to contest or claim early distribution. The stocks, the bonds, the retirement accounts, all of it restructured into a trust with me as the sole beneficiary during my lifetime. Upon my death, the remaining assets would be divided as follows: 40% to charity, 60% split equally among any grandchildren who had maintained a meaningful relationship with me, as determined by an independent trustee. Daniel, Jennifer, and Michael were each to receive exactly $1. The will specifically stated this was intentional, to show they had not been forgotten, but deliberately excluded. There was a separate page explaining the decision. To my children, you are receiving this minimal inheritance because you have demonstrated through your actions that you value money over family, convenience over obligation, and your own comfort over your father's dying wishes. Your mother deserved your presence, your support, and your love during the hardest period of her life. Instead, you offered excuses, distance, and eventual absence. This is not punishment. This is consequence. May you learn from it what you failed to learn from your upbringing. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking so badly the papers rattled. Robert had done this. Quietly, methodically, while I'd been making excuses for our children's absence. While I'd been telling myself they were just busy, just struggling with seeing their father sick, just coping in their own ways. He'd known better, and he'd protected me from my own willingness to be used. The second folder was labeled Financial History. I opened it, not sure I wanted to know what was inside. Spreadsheets, pages and pages of them. Robert had documented every single financial transaction with our children. Every loan, every temporary help, every gift that was supposed to be paid back but never was. Daniel, $127,000 over 10 years, including the wedding contribution, the down payment loan for his first house that was never repaid, the car we'd co-signed for and ended up paying off, and dozens of smaller amounts. $2,000 when his furnace broke, $5,000 for his wife's medical bills, $8,000 when he wanted to invest in his friend's startup. Jennifer, $143,000 over 12 years. Her wedding, the mortgage bailout, 3 different car payments, credit card debt we'd paid off twice, and the ongoing monthly loans that had become so regular I'd stopped thinking of them as loans at all. Just another bill to pay. Michael, $98,000 over 8 years. Every failed business venture, every time he was between jobs, every security deposit and first month's rent on his various apartments. We'd even paid for his girlfriend's engagement ring last year. $3,000 for a ring for a girl we'd met exactly once. Total, $368,000. $368,000 given to our children over the course of their adult lives. Money we'd earned, saved, invested carefully. Money that was supposed to be for our retirement, our security, our future. And not once had any of them paid back a single cent. Not once had they said, "Mom, Dad, you've done enough. We can handle this ourselves." Not once had they treated these gifts with any gratitude or responsibility. Robert had attached a note to this folder. "Linda, I know you're going to feel guilty reading this. You're going to think about all the times I agreed to give them money, all the times I wrote these checks alongside you. But I want you to understand something. I did it for you, not for them. I did it because saying no to them meant listening to you cry at night, worried about whether they were okay. I did it because I couldn't stand watching you hurt yourself to protect them. But I won't be here anymore, and I need you to protect yourself now. This money is gone. They took it and they'll never appreciate what it represented. Our hard work, our sacrifices, our love. Don't let them take anything more." I carefully set that folder aside and reached for the third one. This one was labeled simply "Evidence." Inside were printed screenshots, dozens of them. Social media posts from our children, organized chronologically, covering the past 2 years. Robert had been documenting their lies. There was Daniel's post from a ski trip to Colorado. "Much needed break. Sometimes you just have to prioritize self-care." Dated the same week Robert had started hospice care at home. The same week Daniel had texted me saying he couldn't visit because he was slammed at work. There was Jennifer's Instagram story from a weekend at a beach resort. Her and David, drinks in hand, sunset behind them, caption reading, "Disconnecting from the chaos." Posted 3 days after I'd called her crying, begging her to come see her father because the doctor said it might be his last week. She'd said she couldn't get away. There was Michael's Facebook album from his girlfriend's elaborate birthday party, a rented venue, catered food, professional photographer, dated 2 weeks before Robert died. I'd asked Michael if he could come stay with us for a few days, just so I could sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. He'd said he couldn't possibly get away. He was dealing with too much. Page after page after page. Every excuse they'd given me, paired with photographic evidence of what they'd actually been doing instead of being here. Robert had even printed out our text message exchanges with them. He'd highlighted certain parts. My messages: "Dad's asking for you. The doctor says it's getting close. He'd really love to see you. I need help." Their responses: "Sorry, Mom. Can't right now. Things are crazy here. Send him my love. You've got this." There was a handwritten note clipped to this section. "These aren't mistakes or misunderstandings. This is a pattern. This is who they chose to be. Don't let them rewrite this history after I'm gone. Don't let them pretend they cared." The fourth folder contained something I didn't expect, a small leather journal. I opened it and recognized Robert's handwriting immediately, though it grew progressively shakier as the entries went on. It was a diary, starting from the day of his diagnosis and ending just 3 days before he died. I flipped through it, my vision blurring with tears as I saw my own name mentioned again and again. Linda sat with me through the entire treatment today, even though I know her back was hurting. Linda made my favorite soup, even though the smell of food makes me nauseous. She ate in the kitchen alone so I wouldn't feel bad. Linda fell asleep in the chair again. I wish I could carry her to bed like I used to, but there were other entries too. Daniel called today, asked about the life insurance policy. Didn't ask how I was feeling. Jennifer visited for 45 minutes, spent 30 of them on her phone. Took a selfie with me before she left. Haven't seen it posted anywhere. Guess it wasn't Instagram worthy enough. Michael texted to say he's thinking of me. I'd rather have him here, even for an hour. But I know that won't happen. Linda called the kids again today. I listened to her make excuses for why they can't come. She's crying in the bathroom right now, thinking I can't hear her. I should have protected her from this years ago. I've made the changes to the will. Linda will be angry when she finds out I did this without telling her. But I can't leave this world knowing she'll spend the rest of her life being used by the people who should love her most. 3 days. The nurse says maybe 3 days. None of them have called. Linda keeps checking her phone, waiting. I want to tell her to stop waiting, but I don't have the heart. She still believes in them. I'm glad I won't be here to watch them prove her wrong. The final entry was barely legible. Tomorrow, maybe. I can feel it. Linda is sleeping next to me, holding my hand. She hasn't left my side in 48 hours. She's the only one who matters. The only one who ever really mattered. I hope she forgives me for doing this. I hope she finally sees what I saw. I hope she finds peace when I'm gone, even if it means finding it without them. I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. Robert had spent his final days documenting our children's neglect, not out of bitterness, but out of love. Love for me. Protection for me. He'd known I'd make excuses for them even after he was gone, so he'd made it impossible for me to deny the truth. The last folder was thin, containing only a few pages. The label read, "For Linda." It was a letter, typed this time, probably when his hands had become too weak to write clearly. "My darling Linda, if you've read everything else in this box, you're probably angry with me. I did all of this behind your back. I made decisions about our life, our assets, our children's inheritance without consulting you. I know that goes against everything we promised each other about being partners in all things. But Linda, I'm dying, and I'm terrified of leaving you alone with people who will take everything from you, including your dignity and your sense of self-worth. You've spent our entire marriage putting everyone else first. You put me first, our children first, our grandchildren first. You've given pieces of yourself away so freely that I'm not sure you even know what's left for you. I've watched you make excuses for Daniel's ambition that somehow never includes time for us. I've watched you rationalize Jennifer's convenient memory that forgets promises but remembers when she needs money. I've watched you forgive Michael over and over for being an adult who acts like a teenager. And I've watched you blame yourself, watched you wonder what you did wrong as a mother, watched you question whether you were too strict or not strict enough, too involved or not involved enough. Linda, you did nothing wrong. You were a wonderful mother. You gave them everything. That's the problem. You gave them so much that they never learned to value what they had. They never learned to give back. They never learned that love is reciprocal. I need you to understand something. Their failures as human beings are not your fault. Their selfishness, their entitlement, their complete lack of empathy, none of that came from you. That came from their own choices, from their own character flaws that they've refused to address. The changes I've made to our estate aren't about punishing them. They're about protecting you, about making sure that when I'm gone, you have the resources and the security to live your life on your own terms, to not spend your remaining years being a wallet with a pulse for people who should have been grateful for what they had. They're going to be angry. They're going to say terrible things. They're going to accuse you of manipulating me, of changing my mind when I was sick and vulnerable. Don't believe them. Don't let them rewrite our history. I made these decisions with a clear mind and a full heart. I made them out of love for you, because you deserve better than what they've given you. You deserve rest, peace, freedom. Don't give it back to them. Don't try to fix this. Don't try to make them understand or earn back their place in the will. That's what they're counting on. That's what they've always counted on. Your inability to hold them accountable. For once, Linda, just once, let them experience consequences. Let them feel what it's like to want something and not get it. Let them learn what you've been trying to teach them their whole lives, but they refused to learn. That love without action is just a word. That family is built on presence, not promises. That showing up matters. I love you. I've loved you since the moment I saw you in that coffee shop 43 years ago, arguing with the barista about the correct way to make a cappuccino. I've loved you through every triumph and every heartbreak. I've loved you more than I've loved anything else in this world, including our children. I hope you can forgive me for leaving you. I hope you can forgive me for making these decisions alone. But most of all, I hope you can finally see yourself the way I've always seen you, as someone worthy of being chosen, being prioritized, being loved without conditions or expectations. You don't owe them anything, Linda. You've already given them everything. Now live for yourself. All my love, for all time, Robert. I sat in that small bank room for over an hour, reading and rereading his letter, crying until I had no tears left. Around me were the pieces of my marriage, my family, my entire adult life, laid out in folders and spreadsheets and printed screenshots. Robert had left me the truth, wrapped in protection, sealed with love. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out of my purse and saw 15 new messages. All 3 children, all demanding answers about the estate, the accounts, the house, the life insurance. Not one of them had asked how I was doing. Not one had mentioned their father except in terms of what he'd left behind. Not one had acknowledged the funeral they'd missed, the goodbye they'd chosen not to say. I looked down at Robert's letter again, at his handwriting, at his final gift to me, the gift of clarity, the gift of permission to stop setting myself on fire to keep them warm. I gathered all the folders, placed them carefully back in the safe deposit box, and locked it. These documents would stay here, safe, secure, ready if I needed them. Evidence that what I was about to do wasn't cruelty, it was consequence. As I walked out of the bank into the bright morning sunlight, my phone buzzed again. Jennifer, Mom, this is getting ridiculous. You need to respond. We have a right to know what's going on with the estate. Call me today. I stood on the sidewalk, people rushing past me on their way to ordinary Monday morning destinations, and I made a decision. I turned off my phone and slipped it into my purse. For 40 years, I'd been available at a moment's notice, available to solve problems, to provide money, to offer support that was never reciprocated, available to be taken for granted. Not anymore. They wanted to talk about the estate. Fine. We'd talk. But it would be on my terms, in my time, when I was ready. And I wasn't ready yet. I had some thinking to do first. About who I was without them. About what my life could look like when I finally stopped trying to earn love from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth the effort. Robert had given me one last gift. The gift of seeing clearly. The gift of knowing I wasn't crazy or oversensitive or demanding too much. I was simply a mother who'd loved her children more than they'd loved me back. And it was time to stop pretending that was okay. I kept my phone off for 3 days. 3 days of silence. 3 days of not responding to their messages, their demands, their increasing panic. 3 days of sitting in my house, Robert's house, our house, and simply existing without the constant pull of their needs. It was the longest I'd gone without talking to any of them in over 30 years. On the first day, I walked through every room, really looking at things for the first time since Robert died. I'd been so focused on his care, on managing his pain, on the endless medical appointments and insurance calls and prescription refills, that I hadn't noticed how much of myself I'd erased to make room for his illness. The guest room still had boxes of Michael's stuff from when he'd lived here. Things he'd said he'd come back for but never did. I started carrying them to the garage. If he wanted them, he could ask. If he didn't, I'd donate them. Jennifer's wedding china was still in my dining room hutch, stored there temporarily 8 years ago when she and David moved into a smaller place. She'd gotten a bigger house 4 years ago, but had never mentioned taking them back. I packed them carefully and stacked the boxes by the front door. Daniel's college textbooks lined an entire shelf in Robert's study. Accounting, finance, business management. He'd said he might need them for reference someday. That was 15 years ago. I boxed them up, too. By the end of the first day, I had cleared out physical reminders of the ways I'd let my children occupy space in my life without reciprocating. It felt like breathing after holding my breath underwater. On the second day, I went through my finances. Really went through them. Not just the obvious accounts Robert had restructured, but all of them. I looked at every automatic payment, every recurring charge, every subscription. Netflix account, shared with all 3 kids and their families. I was paying for 7 user profiles. I canceled it. Cell phone plan, family plan with all 3 of their lines on my account, temporarily, until they got their own plans. Daniel had been on it for 12 years. I called the provider and removed them. They could set up their own accounts. Amazon Prime. They all used my account for free shipping. Changed the password. Costco membership. They used my card. Reported it lost and requested a new one that only I would have. Small things. Practical things. Things that separately meant nothing but together represented a pattern of them using me as a resource while I paid for the privilege. On the third day, I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't been back since the funeral. I'd been too angry, too hurt. Angry at Robert for dying and leaving me alone. Angry at myself for not seeing the truth sooner. Angry at my children for being who they were. But sitting at his grave, looking at the temporary marker that would soon be replaced with the stone I'd ordered, I felt the anger start to shift into something else, something that felt almost like peace. "I read everything," I said quietly, running my fingers over his name etched in metal. "The will, the records, your journal, all of it." A breeze rustled through the trees around me. It was a beautiful spot, on a hill overlooking a small pond. Robert had chosen it himself, months before he died. "Somewhere peaceful," he'd said. "Somewhere you can come and not feel sad." "I'm not sad right now," I told him. "I'm not angry either. I think I'm just tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of making excuses. Tired of being someone I'm not so they'll love me." I pulled out the letter he'd written, the one I'd been carrying in my purse since I'd found it at the bank. I'd read it so many times the creases were starting to tear. "You asked me to forgive you," I said. "But Robert, there's nothing to forgive. You did what I should have done years ago. You protected me from my own willingness to be hurt." I sat there for a long time, just talking to him, telling him about the past 3 days, about the clarity that was slowly replacing the fog of grief and shock, about the decision I was making. When I finally left, I turned my phone back on. It exploded with notifications, texts, voicemails, missed calls. 47 messages total. I scrolled through them, watching the progression from confusion to annoyance, to anger, to panic. "Daniel, day 1. Mom, where are you? Call me back." "Daniel, day 2. This is getting weird. Are you okay? Please respond." "Daniel, day 3. Mom, I'm really worried now. If I don't hear from you by tonight, I'm calling the police." "Jennifer, day 1. Mom, we need to talk about the estate. Stop avoiding this." "Jennifer, day 2. Why aren't you answering? This is important. We have decisions to make." "Jennifer, day 3. I drove by the house and your car is there. I know you're ignoring us. This is incredibly immature." "Michael, day 1. Hey Mom, trying to reach you. Hit me back." "Michael, day 2. Getting concerned here. Everything okay?" "Michael, day 3. Daniel said he's calling the cops if we don't hear from you. Where are you?" None of them had come to the house. None of them had actually checked to see if I was okay. They'd just sent messages and expected me to respond immediately, the way I always had. I typed a single text and sent it to all 3 of them in a group message, something I'd never done before. They each had always required individual attention, individual responses. "I'm fine. We need to talk about your father's estate. Come to the house Saturday at 10 a.m., all of you." The responses came within seconds. "Daniel, finally, I can do 10. "Jennifer, about time. I'll be there." "Michael, cool. See you then." Not, "I'm glad you're okay." Not, "We were worried." Not, "How are you holding up?" Just confirmation that they'd show up to discuss money. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I cleaned the house thoroughly, not because it was dirty, but because I needed to do something with my hands. I baked Robert's favorite coffee cake, the one I used to make every Sunday morning. I set the dining room table for 4, using the good china we'd received as a wedding gift 42 years ago. I laid out the folders from the safe deposit box on the sideboard, within easy reach but not immediately visible. I wanted to see them first. Wanted to give them a chance to show me who they really were before I showed them what their father had known all along. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. I woke up early, showered, dressed in a simple blue sweater and slacks, put on the pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary, made coffee, and waited. At 9:47, I heard a car door slam. I looked out the window and saw Jennifer getting out of her SUV. She was on her phone. Animated conversation. laughing. She didn't hang up until she reached the front door. Daniel pulled up at 9:53, also on his phone. He sat in his car for several minutes, finishing his call before coming to the door. Michael arrived exactly at 10, the first time he'd been on time to anything in his entire adult life. I let them in one by one. Brief hugs, perfunctory, obligatory, the kind of hugs you give to acquaintances, not your mother. "Coffee's ready," I said. "Have a seat in the dining room." They filed in, and I watched their eyes go to the table setting, the food, the careful arrangement. I could see them wondering what this was about, why I'd gone to this effort. "Mom, you didn't have to do all this," Jennifer said, but she was already helping herself to coffee. "We just need to go over some paperwork." I poured myself a cup and sat down at the head of the table, Robert's spot. For 40 years, he'd sat here. Now it was mine. "Before we discuss the estate," I said calmly, "I'd like to talk about the funeral." The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Daniel shifted in his chair. Jennifer suddenly became very interested in her coffee. Michael looked at the ceiling. "You weren't there," I continued, my voice steady. "None of you came to say goodbye to your father." "Mom, we explained that," Daniel started. You needed a beach vacation," I interrupted. "All three of you, together, while I buried your father alone." Jennifer set her cup down with a sharp click. "That's not fair. We were grieving in our own way. Everyone processes death differently. By posting Instagram stories of cocktails and sunset dinners?" Michael leaned forward. "Mom, we felt like Dad would have wanted us to celebrate life instead of sitting around being sad." I looked at each of them in turn. My children, the people I'd carried in my body, nursed, raised, loved with everything I had. And they were sitting here, in their father's house, 3 days after I'd buried him, defending a beach party. "Your father spent 2 years dying," I said quietly. 2 years of treatments that made him so sick he couldn't keep down water. 2 years of pain so severe he cried in the middle of the night. 2 years of slowly losing everything that made him Robert, his strength, his independence, his dignity. I paused, making sure I had their full attention. "And in those 2 years, Daniel, you visited 3 times. Total of maybe 5 hours, Jennifer. You came more often but never stayed longer than an hour. You never helped. Never offered to sit with him so I could sleep. Never brought groceries or helped with laundry, or any of the 1,000 exhausting things that come with caring for someone who's dying. And Michael, you came twice in 2 years. We have our own lives," Jennifer said defensively. "We have jobs, kids, responsibilities." "So did I said. "I had a husband dying in my living room. That was my responsibility, but somehow I still managed to text you, call you, send you updates, beg you to visit, while you were all too busy with your responsibilities." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Where is this coming from? You never said you needed help." I almost laughed. "I shouldn't have had to say it. Your father was dying. That should have been enough." The silence stretched out. They looked uncomfortable, caught. But not sorry, not apologetic, just defensive. "The funeral," I brought the conversation back. "You knew when it was. I sent you all the details. You confirmed you'd received them. And then you went to the beach instead. We thought it would be too hard," Michael said weakly, seeing him like that, in a casket. "He was your father, and we loved him," Jennifer insisted. "Just because we didn't perform our grief the way you wanted doesn't mean we didn't care." I reached behind me and picked up one of the folders from the sideboard, the one labeled Evidence. I placed it on the table between us. "Your father kept records," I said, "of everything. Every excuse you gave for not visiting. Every time you said you were too busy or too stressed or too overwhelmed." I opened the folder and pulled out the first set of screenshots. Daniel at a ski resort posted the same week he'd told me he was slammed at work and couldn't come see his father. I slid it across to him. He glanced at it, his face flushing slightly, but said nothing. Jennifer's posts from the beach resort weekend, dated 3 days after I'd called her crying, telling her the doctor said Robert might only have days left. She'd said she couldn't get away. I placed those in front of her. She didn't look down. Michael's girlfriend's elaborate birthday party, complete with professional photos, from 2 weeks before Robert died. When I'd asked him to come stay so I could sleep, he'd said he was dealing with too much. I set those in front of him. He picked them up, looked at them, set them down without comment. He knew, I said softly. Your father knew you were lying. He knew what you were really doing while I was here alone with him, watching him die. This is manipulative, Jennifer said, her voice rising. You're using Dad's death to make us feel guilty. No, I replied. I'm using your own actions to show you who you are. Daniel stood up abruptly. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. We came to discuss the estate, not to be attacked. Sit down, Daniel. Something in my voice made him pause. I'd never spoken to him like that before. Firm, final, not asking, telling. He sat. I pulled out the second folder. Financial history. Your father tracked every dollar we gave you over the years. Every loan that wasn't repaid. Every temporary help that became permanent. Every time you promised to pay us back and never did. I opened it to the summary page and placed it in the center of the table. Daniel, you owe us $127,000. Jennifer, $143,000. Michael, $98,000. Total, $368,000. The number hung in the air like smoke. We never asked you to keep track, Michael said. Those were gifts. Were they? I asked. Because you called them loans. You promised to repay them. You said it was just until you got back on your feet. Every single time. This is insane, Jennifer said, pushing the papers away. You're sitting here itemizing money you chose to give us, making us feel like we're criminals. I'm making you see reality, I said. Your father and I gave you everything. Our time, our money, our support. And you took it all without ever once thinking about what it cost us. I pulled out the final folder, the will. Your father changed his will 4 months before he died, I said, watching their faces carefully. He left the house to me, with provisions that prevent any of you from forcing me to sell it or move. He placed all our savings and assets into a trust for me. His pension goes to me. I paused, letting that sink in. And he left each of you exactly $1. The explosion was immediate. He wouldn't do that, Daniel said, but his voice was uncertain. That's illegal, Jennifer insisted. We'll contest it. You manipulated him when he was sick. You can try, I said calmly. But the will was prepared by an attorney, witnessed by professionals, and includes a detailed explanation of exactly why he made this choice. He was evaluated by 2 different doctors who certified his mental competency specifically for this purpose. I opened the will to the page with Robert's statement to them and slid it across the table. They read it in silence. I watched the color drain from Jennifer's face, watched Daniel's hands start to shake slightly, watched Michael close his eyes as if he could make it disappear. He can't cut us out completely, Jennifer said finally, but there was a tremor in her voice. We're his children. You're adults who chose not to act like his children, I replied. Not when it mattered, not when he needed you. This is about the funeral, Daniel said suddenly. You're doing this because we didn't come to the funeral. I'm not doing anything, I said. Your father did this. 4 months before he died. Before the funeral. Before you had the chance to show up or not show up. He did it because he saw the pattern. He saw who you'd become. And he loved me enough to protect me from you. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jennifer was crying now, angry tears. How could you let him do this? I didn't know, I said simply. He did it without telling me because he knew I'd try to stop him, because even after everything, I would have protected you from the consequences of your own choices. I stood up and walked to the sideboard where I'd placed one more thing. A letter I'd written this morning. Copies for each of them. Your father left me everything because he wanted me to have security, peace, and freedom in whatever years I have left. He wanted me to stop exhausting myself trying to earn love from people who'd decided I wasn't worth the effort. I handed each of them an envelope. This is my will, I said. Very simple. Everything I have will go to charity when I die. The house will be sold and the proceeds donated to the cancer center where your father was treated. Any remaining assets will go to organizations that support caregivers. You can't do that, Michael said, his voice breaking. I can. And I have. Your father protected me. Now I'm protecting his legacy. I'm making sure the resources we built together go to people who will appreciate them, who will use them to help others. Jennifer looked up at me, her face blotchy and red. So that's it? You're cutting us off completely? No, I said. You cut yourselves off, years ago, when you started seeing me as a bank instead of a person, when you started measuring your relationship with me by what I could give you instead of who I was. I walked back to my chair but didn't sit down. I'm 64 years old. Your father just died. And instead of asking how I'm doing, instead of offering to help me navigate this grief, instead of showing up for me the way I showed up for you your entire lives, you came here demanding to know about inheritance. That's not true, Daniel protested weakly. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to their messages from the day of the funeral. Hey, Mom, when you get a chance, can you send me the info for Dad's life insurance policy? I read Daniel's message aloud. Mom, we should probably talk about the house soon. Jennifer's. Did Dad have any stocks or bonds? Michael's. Not one of you mentioned the funeral. Not one of you asked how I was. You went straight to the money. I set my phone down on the table. Your father knew. He knew this is what you'd do. That's why he did what he did. Not to punish you, to protect me. Jennifer stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. You're right, I said. You don't. You're free to leave any time, but understand this. The decision has been made. Your father's will is legal and ironclad. My will is filed and notarized. There's nothing to contest, nothing to negotiate, nothing to inherit. She stared at me for a long moment, then grabbed her purse and walked out. I heard the front door slam, then her car starting in the driveway. Michael stood up next. I don't know what you want from us, Mom. An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. We should have been there more. Is that what you wanted to hear? No, I said softly. I wanted you to mean it. I wanted you to understand what you did. But you don't. You just want your inheritance back. He left without another word. Daniel stayed seated, staring at the papers spread across the table. Finally, he looked up at me. I thought we were a family, he said. So did I replied. But families show up for each other. Families care about more than money. And we stopped being a family a long time ago. I just didn't want to see it. He nodded slowly, then stood and walked to the door. He paused there, hand on the knob, and turned back. Dad really did this? You didn't pressure him or manipulate him when he was sick? Your father was many things, I said, but he was never weak-minded. He saw clearly what I'd refused to see, and he loved me enough to do something about it. Daniel left without saying goodbye. I stood alone in my dining room, looking at the table I'd so carefully set. The coffee had gone cold. The cake sat untouched. The folders were scattered where they'd looked at them, evidence of a family that had died long before Robert's body gave out. I started cleaning up slowly, methodically, putting away the good china, covering the cake, filing the papers back into their folders. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. You'll regret this. You're going to die alone and miserable, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself. I read it twice, then deleted it. I wouldn't die alone. I'd been alone for years, surrounded by people who took but never gave. Now I was just alone, honestly. Alone by choice. Alone with dignity. And that was better than what I'd had before. The week after the confrontation was the quietest of my life. No calls, no texts, no unexpected visits. The silence I'd been craving for 2 years had finally arrived, and it felt nothing like I'd expected. Not peaceful exactly, but not painful either. Just empty, like a house after guests leave, when you're cleaning up and finding yourself again in the mess they left behind. I spent the first few days in a strange fog. I'd wake up and reach for my phone automatically, checking for messages that weren't there. I'd start to dial Jennifer's number before remembering there was nothing to say. Old habits, dying hard, but by the fourth day, something shifted. I woke up and didn't reach for my phone first thing. I made coffee and sat in the kitchen, watching birds at the feeder Robert had hung outside the window. I ate breakfast slowly, without rushing, without worrying about who needed something from me. It was the first morning in years that belonged entirely to me. Margaret Henderson, my neighbor, came by on Thursday with a casserole. She'd done that a lot in the weeks after Robert died, always finding reasons to check on me without being obvious about it. "How are you holding up?" she asked, setting the dish on my counter. "I'm okay," I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. She studied my face for a moment. "I heard cars here on Saturday. Your kids finally came by?" Word traveled fast in our neighborhood. Someone had probably seen all 3 cars in my driveway and mentioned it. "They did," I said simply. "And?" I thought about how to answer that, about whether to maintain the fiction I'd been performing for years, pretending everything was fine, protecting them from judgment. "And we had an overdue conversation about reality," I said finally. Margaret nodded slowly. She was a smart woman. She'd probably known for years what I'd refused to see. "Sometimes the truth is kinder than pretending." "Robert thought so," I said. He was right. After she left, I sat with those words. The truth is kinder than pretending. For 40 years I'd pretended their selfishness was just independence, pretended their neglect was just busy schedules, pretended their taking was just temporary need. Robert had stopped pretending, and in doing so, he'd given me permission to stop too. That afternoon, I did something I'd been thinking about since the funeral. I called the cancer center where Robert had been treated. "I'd like to set up a meeting to discuss a donation," I told the development director. "A significant one, in my husband's name." We scheduled for the following Tuesday. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: purpose. Not the exhausting purpose of managing other people's lives and needs, but genuine purpose. A way to honor Robert that mattered. The weekend was strange. Saturdays had always been family days when the kids were young. Even after they'd grown and moved out, I'd somehow maintained that association. Saturdays meant waiting for calls that increasingly didn't come, or fielding requests for help with one thing or another. This Saturday, no one called. No one needed anything. I was completely free. I drove to the bookstore in town, something I hadn't done in years. Robert and I used to go every weekend before he got sick. We'd browse for an hour, have coffee in the cafe, buy a book or two. It had been our ritual. Walking in alone felt odd at first, but as I wandered the aisles, picking up books and reading back covers, I felt some knot inside me start to loosen. I bought 4 books. 4. When was the last time I'd read for pleasure? When was the last time I'd done anything just because I wanted to? At the cafe, I ordered Robert's favorite, a cappuccino and a blueberry scone. I sat at what had been our usual table by the window and opened one of the books, and for 2 hours, I just read. No phone checking, no worrying about who needed what. Just me and words on a page and weak autumn sunlight coming through the glass. On my way out, I ran into Susan Chen, an old colleague from when I'd worked as a school librarian. That was before the kids, before I'd quit to stay home and raise them. "Linda, I haven't seen you in ages." She pulled me into a genuine hug, the kind that feels like coming home. "How are you? I heard about Robert. I'm so sorry." We sat back down in the cafe, and she ordered more coffee. We talked for another hour. She told me about her work, about her grandchildren, about the book club she'd started with some retired teachers. "You should join us," she said. "We meet every other Thursday. It's just 6 of us, very casual. We read whatever we want and mostly just drink wine and talk." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. She squeezed my hand. "I'm glad I ran into you. You know, I always admired how devoted you were to your family, but I hope now you'll take some time for yourself. You've earned it." Devoted to my family. That's how people saw me. The devoted mother, the devoted wife, the woman who gave and gave and gave. What they didn't see was how that devotion had slowly hollowed me out, how I'd given away so many pieces of myself that I'd forgotten what was left. On Monday, my lawyer called. Margaret Chen, the attorney Robert had worked with on the estate changes. Mrs. Patterson, I wanted to follow up after your meeting with your children. Have there been any attempts to contact you or contest the will? Nothing legal, I said. Some angry text messages. But no formal action. Good. Though I should tell you that Daniel Patterson contacted our office this morning. He asked to speak with me about the estate. I declined, of course, and reminded him that my firm represented your husband's interests, not his. I closed my eyes. Of course Daniel had called. Of course he was looking for angles, for ways to challenge what Robert had done. He seemed to think there might be grounds for undue influence, Margaret continued, that perhaps Robert wasn't in his right mind when he made the changes. Robert had 2 doctors certify his competency, I said. That's in the file. I know. And I made sure to mention that to Daniel. I also mentioned that if he chose to pursue legal action, the court would have access to all of Robert's documentation, including the evidence of financial exploitation over the years. I heard the steel in her voice. Margaret had been Robert's attorney for 15 years. She'd liked him, respected him, and she clearly understood what he'd been protecting me from. Thank you, I said quietly. Mrs. Patterson, I've been doing this work for 23 years. I've seen a lot of families torn apart over money, but I want you to know that what Robert did wasn't cruel or unusual. It was protective, and it was completely legal. If your children choose to fight it, they'll lose, and they'll expose themselves in the process. After we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about that word, protective. That's what love looked like in the end, not grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Just someone who saw you clearly and chose to protect you, even when it was hard, even when it meant going against what you thought you wanted. Tuesday's meeting at the cancer center was emotional in ways I hadn't anticipated. The development director, a kind woman named Rachel, walked me through the programs Robert had participated in, the support groups, the pain management services, the end-of-life counseling. Your husband spoke very highly of the care he received, she said. He told us more than once how much the staff helped both of you navigate his illness. I hadn't known Robert had talked to them about me, but of course he had. Even in his dying, he'd been thinking about how to help me. We discussed setting up an endowment in his name. It would fund support services for caregivers, something Robert had specifically mentioned in the notes he'd left with Margaret. Linda shouldn't have had to do this alone, he'd written. Make sure other caregivers have more help than she did. I wrote the check right there, $50,000. Money that Daniel had probably been counting as part of his inheritance. Money that would instead help people who were living through what I'd just survived. It felt good. Better than good. It felt right. When I got home, there was a car in my driveway, not one I recognized. A woman sat on my front steps, standing up as I pulled in. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked nervous. Mrs. Patterson? She asked as I got out of my car. Yes? I'm Sophie, Daniel's wife. I'd met Sophie maybe 5 times in the 12 years she'd been married to my son. She'd always been quiet at family gatherings, staying in the background while Daniel dominated conversations. I'd tried to connect with her over the years, but she'd always seemed skittish, uncomfortable. Can we talk? She asked. Please? Just for a few minutes? I hesitated, then nodded. Come inside. I made tea while she sat at my kitchen table, her hands wrapped around her cup like she was cold even though the house was warm. I don't know if Daniel told you, but I wasn't with them. At the beach. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed. I didn't go to the funeral, but I didn't go on their trip either. Where were you? I asked, sitting down across from her. I was here, in town. I came to the cemetery after the service was over. I didn't want to intrude, but I needed to pay my respects to Robert. He was always kind to me. I set my cup down carefully. Why are you telling me this? Because what they did was wrong, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Daniel tried to get me to come to the beach with them. Said it would be therapeutic. I told him I thought it was horrible, that his father just died, and his mother needed him. We had a huge fight about it. She took a breath. And then Saturday, after he came back from seeing you, he was furious. Said you'd manipulated Robert, that you were trying to steal their inheritance. But Mrs. Patterson, I saw how you took care of Robert. Daniel refused to help, refused to visit, refused to acknowledge what you were going through. Tears were running down her face now. I'm leaving him, she said. I filed papers yesterday. I can't be married to someone who treats his own mother the way he's treated you, someone who cares more about money than people. I reached across the table and took her hand. Sophie, you don't have to do that because of this. It's not just this, she said. This is just the thing that made me finally see him clearly, the same way Robert saw all of them. We sat there for a long time, two women who'd loved men who'd disappointed us in fundamental ways. When she finally left, she hugged me at the door. I'm sorry, she whispered, for not speaking up sooner, for not standing with you. You're speaking up now, I said. That's what matters. After she left, I sat on my couch and cried, not for Daniel, or for the marriage that was ending, but for Sophie, for the courage it took to see truth and act on it, and for Robert, who'd seen that same truth and acted to protect me. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. I joined Susan's book club and found myself laughing more than I had in years. I volunteered at the cancer center, helping other caregivers navigate the overwhelming maze of insurance and medications and appointments. I started going to a yoga class at the community center on Tuesday mornings. Small things, normal things, the kind of life I'd forgotten was possible. Daniel called once, 3 weeks after our confrontation. I almost didn't answer. Mom, he said when I picked up. His voice was flat, careful. Sophie left me. I know, I said. She came to see me. There was a long pause. Of course she did. Did you tell her to leave me? No, Daniel. She made that choice herself. This is your fault, he said, his voice rising. You've destroyed this family. Dad would be ashamed of what you've done. I could have argued, could have defended myself, listed all the ways they'd destroyed this family long before I'd stopped pretending everything was fine. But I was tired of arguing with people who refused to hear. If that's what you need to believe, then believe it, I said quietly. But Daniel, your father did what he did because he loved me, because he could see what I couldn't. That you and your siblings had stopped being my children and started being my burden. We're your children, he said. That doesn't just go away because Dad wrote a will you manipulated him into. You're right, I said. You're my children. I carried you, I raised you, I loved you with everything I had, but you stopped being my family the moment you decided I only mattered when I was useful to you. That's not true. Then where were you, Daniel? Where were you when your father was dying? Where were you at his funeral? Where were you when I needed you to be my son instead of my accountant? Silence. I love you, I said, and my voice cracked slightly. I will always love you. But I can't keep setting myself on fire to keep you warm. Your father understood that. I wish you could too. I hung up before he could respond. That night, I dreamed of Robert. We were young again, in our first apartment, dancing in the kitchen to music from a cheap radio. He held me close and whispered, I'm proud of you, Linda. So proud. I woke up crying, but they were different tears. Not grief exactly, something cleaner. Something that felt almost like healing. The next morning, I did something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I called a realtor. I'm interested in selling my house, I told her. But I want to be clear. I'm not in a hurry. I want to find the right buyer. Someone who'll love it the way we did. She came by that afternoon, walked through every room, made notes on her tablet. It's a beautiful home, she said. Well maintained. Good bones. You could get a very good price. I don't need the best price, I said. I need the right people. She looked at me curiously, but nodded. After she left, I stood in Robert's study, my study now, and looked around at the life we'd built. The books, the photos, the furniture we'd chosen together. So many memories in these walls. But staying here meant staying in the past, meant waking up every day in rooms that echoed with what I'd lost, meant waiting for children who would never come back, not in the way I'd once hoped. It was time to build something new, something that was mine alone. I pulled out my phone and opened the group text with my children. I'd muted it weeks ago, but the messages had kept coming. Angry at first, then pleading, then angry again. I hadn't responded to any of them. Now I typed one final message. I'm selling the house. Whatever you have here, you have 30 days to collect it. After that, I'm donating everything that remains. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. I hit send and then did something I'd never done before. I blocked all 3 of them. Not forever, maybe, but for now. For as long as I needed to find myself again without the constant pull of their demands and accusations and manipulation. My phone felt lighter in my hand. My chest felt lighter too. I walked through the house one more time, saying goodbye to the ghosts that lived here, the ghost of the woman I'd been, always serving, always giving, always hoping that if she just loved hard enough, it would be enough. She could rest now. Robert had made sure of that, and I could finally become whoever I was meant to be when I stopped living for everyone else. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of my new apartment, watching the sun rise over the river. It was smaller than the house, much smaller. Just 2 bedrooms, a galley kitchen, a living room with windows that overlooked the water. But it was mine. Chosen by me, decorated by me, filled with only the things I actually wanted to keep. The house had sold in 3 weeks. A young couple with a baby on the way. They'd walked through with tears in their eyes, talking about the life they'd build there. I'd given them a good price, below market value. Money didn't matter anymore. Finding the right people did. None of my children had come to collect their things. The 30 days had passed in silence. I'd donated it all. Michael's boxes, Jennifer's china, Daniel's books. Let someone else get use from objects that had only gathered dust in my home. I'd kept one thing, a photo from that Grand Canyon trip, the 5 of us smiling, still a family. I put it in a drawer, not on display, but not thrown away either. A reminder of what had been, what I'd hoped for, what could never be again. The morning routine I'd developed felt sacred now. Coffee on the balcony, watching boats on the river, reading for an hour, then yoga, or volunteering at the cancer center, or book club, or lunch with Susan and her friends who'd become my friends. Margaret Henderson had helped me move. She'd driven down with her husband Jim, and they'd spent the weekend helping me unpack, hanging pictures, assembling furniture. Real help, freely given, expecting nothing in return. "This suits you," Margaret had said, standing in my living room that first night. "It feels like you." She was right. The house had been Robert's and mine. Then just Robert's dying place. Then a museum of disappointment. This apartment was something else entirely. A beginning. I'd received one letter, forwarded from my old address, from Sophie. She'd finalized her divorce from Daniel, moved to Portland, started over. "Thank you for showing me what courage looks like," she'd written. "I hope you found your peace." I had. Not the peace that comes from resolution or reconciliation. The peace that comes from acceptance. From understanding that some relationships can't be fixed because the other people don't want to do the work. My children had made their choices. I'd made mine. We'd all have to live with the consequences. On the 6-month anniversary of Robert's death, I visited his grave. The permanent stone was there now, simple and elegant. Robert Patterson, beloved husband. He loved fiercely and protected completely. I'd chosen those words carefully. They were true. I placed fresh flowers at the base of the stone and sat on the bench nearby. The grief had softened. No longer the sharp, cutting thing it had been. Now it was gentler. A sadness that lived alongside everything else. Manageable. Survivable. I did it, I told him quietly. I sold the house. I started over. I stopped waiting for them to become who I needed them to be. A breeze rustled through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a bird sang. "I'm not angry anymore," I continued. "I'm just sad that they couldn't see what they had until it was gone. Sad that they chose money over love. Sad that I can't fix it." I pulled out the letter he'd written me, the one I'd read so many times the creases were worn soft. I didn't need to read it again. I'd memorized every word. "You were right," I whispered, "about all of it. Thank you for loving me enough to set me free." I sat there until the sun was high overhead, feeling the warmth on my face. Then I stood, touched the stone gently, and walked back to my car. I had yoga at 3, book club at 7. Tomorrow, I was meeting with Rachel at the Cancer Center to discuss expanding the caregiver support program. Next week, Susan and I were driving to the coast for a few days. My life was full. Not with obligation or guilt or the exhausting work of managing other people's expectations. Full with choices I'd made. People who valued me. Moments that belonged to me. I drove home along the river, windows down, radio playing softly. And for the first time in years, maybe in my entire adult life, I felt something I'd almost forgotten was possible. I felt light. Robert had given me one last gift. Not money or property or security, though those things mattered. He'd given me permission. Permission to stop sacrificing myself for people who'd never appreciate the sacrifice. Permission to choose myself. Permission to live. And I was living. Finally, fully, honestly. At a red light, I caught my own eyes in the rearview mirror. I looked different. Older, yes. Grief had marked me. But there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like contentment. "Thank you, my love," I whispered to the empty car, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. The light turned green, and I drove forward into whatever came next, carrying nothing but the lessons learned and the peace earned through finally choosing myself.